please distribute books. San Francisco, 5th of July 1970. Srila Prabhupada was attending the 1970 Rath Yatra in San Francisco. The day was cold and windy, and about 10,000 people had joined in Lord Jagannath's procession through Golden Gate Path. Srila Prabhupada had danced in the street with thousands of participants during the parade, addressed a large crowd in an auditorium by the beach, and looked on as his disciples had distributed a free vegetarian prasadam feast to thousands. But when a devotee arrived with a half dozen's advance copies of Volume 1 of Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Srila Prabhupada appeared especially pleased. Surrounded by devotees and curious festival goers, Srila Prabhupada held one of the books, admiring the front cover with its full color picture of Radha and Krishna. The volume was big, almost 7.5 by 10.5 inches, and its dust jacket shone silver with large bright red letters, Krishna. It was a transcendental wonder in Srila Prabhupada's reverent hands. Onlookers could barely restrain themselves from pressing in against Srila Prabhupada to peer over his shoulders, and they didn't restrain their exclamations when Prabhupada smiled and opened the volume. He examined the illustrations, the print, the paper, and the binding. Very nice, he said. He fixed his attention on a page, reading. Then he looked up and announced that this greatly valuable book, Krishna, had just arrived and that everyone should read it. Holding one book in his hand with the other copies stacked before him, he said that anyone who so desired should come forward and buy a copy. People began clamoring, and hands with $10 bills thrust forward, while voices cried out, begging for a copy, and Prabhupada promptly sold every book, not even keeping one for himself. For the devotees, Srila Prabhupada's selling of the Krishna book was the most spectacular event of the Rath Yatra festival. They poured over the purchased books in groups, discussing Krishna's pastimes and the effect they would have on the people of America. Brahmananda told how in 1967 Prabhupada had given away his advance copy of Teachings of Lord Chaitanya in his room at 26 Second Avenue in New York City. Just before that book had arrived, Srila Prabhupada had been sitting and talking with Satyavrata, a disciple who had previously stopped coming to the temple due to petty quarreling with his godbrothers. When the copy of Teachings of Lord Chaitanya had arrived, Srila Prabhupada had lovingly inspected it and had then offered it to Satyavrata as a gift. Brahmananda had been astounded to see Srila Prabhupada give away his only copy of the book. Having helped publish the book, Brahmananda knew how painstakingly Prabhupada had written it and how he had anxiously waited for years for the book to finally see print. Yet once it had arrived, he had immediately given it away, and to a disciple who was not even in good standing. Satyavrata had taken the book, thanked Srila Prabhupada, and left, never to be seen again. Although Srila Prabhupada wanted his disciples to be as eager to distribute Krishna conscious literature as he was, none of them knew how to do it. Distributing a magazine and asking for a small donation was one thing, but a big, hardbound book, when the entire shipment of teachings of Lord Chaitanya had arrived in New York in April of 1967, the devotees had hired a truck, picked up the books at the dock, and unloaded them at 26 Second Avenue. They had then shipped them to ISKCON centers in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Boston, Montreal, and elsewhere, and there they remained. Some devotees had tried placing ads in magazines and leaving books in bookstores on consignment, but the books didn't tell, but the books didn't sell. How to sell these big hardbound books remained a mystery until something significant happened, an accidental discovery. One day in 1971, while driving back to the temple after chanting in downtown San Francisco, two brahmacharis stopped at a local service station for gas. When the attendant came to the window for money, one of the devotees showed him a Krishna book. The attendant seemed interested, and the two devotees began preaching the glories of Krishna consciousness. When they suggested he take the book as payment for the gas, he agreed. Astonished at what had happened and inspired at their success, the two brahmacharis went the next day with several Krishna books and stood in front of a grocery store. And again it happened. This time they sold two books. Keshava, the San Francisco Temple president, phoned his GBC supervisor and brother, Karandar, in Los Angeles to tell him what had happened. It's like a miracle, Keshava exclaimed. Karandar encouraged him to experiment further, and soon the San Francisco temple had half a dozen men going from door to door showing the books to people in their homes. When Buddhimanta began selling as many as 5 books in a day, the devotees in other temples, especially Los Angeles, San Diego, and Denver, wanted to follow his example. And whoever tried it and sold a book became caught up in a euphoric excitement. The experience and testimonies of devotees selling Srila Prabhupada's books describe a special taste, distinct from the happiness young men might ordinarily experience by stumbling upon a sales technique and finding themselves on the verge of making a lot of money. The difference is that the devotees' book distribution, being devotional service to Krishna, produces an ecstasy that is transcendental, an ecstasy far beyond even the greatest material happiness. Ordinary business and the business of selling Krishna conscious literature are as different as material life from spiritual life, and anyone observing spiritual life from the material point of view will not understand it. Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati has compared such empirical attempts to understand the ecstasy of Krishna consciousness with attempts to taste honey by licking the outside of the bottle. The young men and women beginning to distribute books in America knew that Srila Prabhupada, by giving them Krishna consciousness, had saved them from hellish life, and they wanted to help him give Krishna consciousness to others. And such preaching by distributing his books was ecstasy, spiritual ecstasy. By mid 1971, the temples were selling hundreds of Krishna books a week. Karandar, Prabhupada's book fund manager, began sending Sankirtan newsletters to the North American temples and to Srila Prabhupada. By listing by listening the monthly results of each temple's book distribution, the newsletters incited competition. Karandar's December 1971 newsletter summed up the mood of the year and urged the devotees to increase. Recently, in an all-out program to sell books, the San Francisco Temple has been averaging 20 Krishna books per day distribution. What is their technique? Keshava Prabhu says, simply we make it out priority activity. All you have to do is want to do it and then try as hard as you can. Everywhere we go, we carry BTGs and Krishna books. He says, on street, SKP, door to door, to the laundromat, to the store, everywhere, we have been taxing our brains in so many fancy and complicated ways to try to increase sales. But as it has been experienced, nothing is more successful than simply taking the books personally in hand and going door to door with this causeless mercy. Just consider how many hours a day do we spend specifically trying to distribute Srila Prabhupada's literature, which is the dearmost thing to him. The crowning touch to end the year's Sankirtan, however, came not from the newsletter but from Prabhupada himself, who wrote to Keshava, the king of Krishna book distribution. I have been receiving so many reports about how my disciples from the San Francisco Temple cannot be surpassed by anyone in distributing my books. Sometimes they are selling as many as 70 Krishna books daily. So if this is true, then certainly when I return to the US, I must come and stay in your temple. By distributing my books profusely, you are giving me great encouragement to translate. And you are all helping me to fulfill the order which Guru Maharaj gave me. So I am so much grateful to you, and I am sure Krishna will bless you a million times over for doing this work. I hope that you and all my beloved disciples in San Francisco Temple are in strong health and jolly mood. Copies of this letter went out to every ISKCON centers. Prabhupada had always giving his blessings to all the devotees, but never before could anyone recall his saying a devotee would get Krishna's blessings a million times over. Although a letter from Prabhupada usually instructed a specific devotee, the instruction often had universal application. And Srila Prabhupada's letters made clear his disciples' top priority, book distribution. I am very pleased to hear that you are increasing in your distribution of your books and magazines. This is a good sign that your preaching work is also strong. The more you increase your strength in preaching, the more you will go on selling books. I want especially that my books be distributed widely. Prabhupada's ambition was to replace mundane literature with transcendental. At least in every home, there should be one piece of Krishna conscious literature. He reasoned, because if a person read only one page, his life would be turned toward perfection. If 1% of the readers become devotees, he wrote, that will change the world. Whereas mail order advertisers were satisfied with a 5% response, Srila Prabhupada spoke of an even smaller percentage, 1% whom he thought could become pure devotees in response to giving, to receiving a book. The more we produce such literature and sell them profusely all over the world, the more we will deliver the world from the suicide force. To Jagadish, he wrote, I am encouraged to see your report of books sold because it proves that you consider it your responsibility to see that more and more people are reading our literature. Actually, this is the solid basis for our preaching work. No other movement has got such profuse authority for preaching. And if someone reads our Krishna conscious philosophy, he becomes convinced. Prabhupada continued to insist that all major Krishna conscious programs be remained, including deity worship, chanting Hare Krishna in public, and holding outside literatures. All programs were important, but book distribution, whenever possible, should accompany the other programs. To a sannyasi whose main program was public lecturing, Prabhupada wrote, distribute books as many as possible. If anyone hears some philosophy from us, that will help him. But if he purchases one book, that may turn his life. So selling books is the best preaching activity. Sell books, hold the kirtan in public places like schools and colleges, preach. And in a letter to Bhagavan Das in France, he stressed the same thing. What will your 3 minutes preaching do? But if they buy one book, it may turn their life. During the period of increasing book distribution, one of Srila Prabhupada's newly initiated sannyasis concocted the idea what the devotees should spend much more time studying while visiting New York temple. This sannyasi openly advocated that devotees read Srila Prabhupada's books 5 to 8 hours daily. The temple was following a new schedule Srila Prabhupada had set up, which devotees attending the morning program going out all day for street chanting and book distribution, and returning in the evening for a class on Bhagavad Gita. But now controversy arose, and an urgent phone call was placed to Srila Prabhupada in Los Angeles. When Prabhupada heard the details from his secretary, he immediately responded. My reply is that this Sankirtan or street chanting must go on. It is our most important program. Lord Chaitanya's movement means the Sankirtan movement. You may simply take 2 hours for chanting 16 rounds daily, 2 hours for reading congregationally, and balance of time go out and Sankirtan. Go out for Sankirtan. We must do both, reading books and distributing books. But distributing books is the main propaganda. Reading in class for 2 hours is sufficient, but other reading can be done in spare time if one has got it. It is not that one has to be always reading. 1 hour a morning for Bhagavad Gita class and 1 hour evening, either Bhagavad Gita or Nectar of Devotion, that is sufficient. January 1972. You should always think of new outlets for distributing my books. Srila Prabhupada wrote to Jagadish. And new outlets the devotees found shopping centers, malls, parking lots. They were meeting more people than ever before. By entering the malls and shopping centers, the devotees plunged into the heart of American society, meeting pious and impious, rich and poor, black and white. Book selling was still difficult, but the devotees persevered, carrying their heavy book bags, and distributing the literature they knew could solve all problems. The devotees saw the shoppers as so many walking victims of material energy, people living for sensual and mental pleasure and therefore doomed to an inauspicious death. Any serious devotee could philosophically explain from Bhagavad Gita the predicament of the materialist. But now they were directly witnessing this plight. And by Prabhupada's mercy, they were working hard to deliver the missing essence of transcendental knowledge to the bewildered souls. Then came the discovery of traveling from town to town to sell books. Some of the brahmacharis in Los Angeles had been feeling that by staying in the temple, they were wasting time they could be using for book distribution. So they loaded a van with Krishna books and went to areas where they could camp for a week, live a simpler life, and distribute books as many hours a day as they liked. This traveling Sankirtan produced another significant increase by creating an environment wherein the men could become fully absorbed in their work. The new program spread quickly throughout the ISKCON world and Srila Prabhupada liked it. I am very glad to hear from you the wonderful news of traveling party in England. I think the people of that place are becoming more and more inclined for this Krishna consciousness movement. They are inviting you to stay at their houses. They are taking books, becoming sometimes devotees. All of these are very encouraging signs to me. Simply go on in this way, stopping, stopping in every village and city in England, Scotland, or if there are other places like Ireland, simply stop for some time, distribute books and hold Sankirtan procession. Answer their questions, give some leaflets or small informations freely, distribute prasadam wherever possible, at least some small thing. And if there is some genuine interest being shown, then request the townspeople to arrange some engagements for speaking in their schools or in someone's home or a hall like that. In this way, remain always without anxiety for destination and comfortable situations, always relying only on the mercy of Krishna for your plan. Just go on preaching his message and selling his books wherever there is interest. We shall not waste time if there is no interest or if people are unfriendly. There are so many places to go. Srila Prabhupada began saying that opening new centers was less important now that the traveling parties were combining the country. When he heard that the temple president in Vancouver has acquired a bus for traveling, he wrote, I think we are becoming like a gigantic guerrilla warfare movement fighting with Maya. This traveling in buses is the best means to drive away Maya and establish Krishna consciousness all over the world. Prabhupada was glad to hear that temple presidents and zonal leaders were also going out with the traveling Sankirtan parties. The Vedic concept of the commander, he said, is that he must fight in the front lines, not sit behind the scenes, sheltered, having already witnessed how some of his leading disciples had become bogged down by managing many things. He advised them all to travel and preach, distributing literature wherever they went. Practically, this ISKCON organization is there because I have been always traveling. I never sat down in my old age. No. So you follow my example and preach widely all over the world. That is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's version. When a devotee in California wrote Srila Prabhupada for permission to give up married life and go on traveling Sankirtan, Prabhupada replied that to give up family life was not necessary. Lord Chaitanya had taught that being a sannyasi or a grihastha did not matter as long as one fully served Krishna. A household could also sometimes travel and distribute books with or without his wife. Near the end of 1972, the BBT newsletter, now compiled by Karandar's assistant Rameshwar, reported the ever-increasing results of book distribution. Book distribution continues soaring to all-time highs as more than 25 traveling Sankirtan parties roam the countryside, affecting the lives of hundreds of thousands of conditioned souls. Since mid September, we have distributed over 15,000 complete Krishna trilogy sets, and since mid August, we have distributed over 9,000 soft Bhagavad Gitas and over 950 hard Bhagavad Gitas. Macmillan too has completely sold out 20,000 Gitas sold commercially and is reprinting large quantities for the Christmas rush. Another breakthrough for book distribution came at the end of 1972. The previous year, devotees had taken advantage of the Christmas season by selling the Krishna book door to door, but no one had been aware just how significant the Christmas reason would actually be. Rameshwar. It was on December 22, 1972, that we accidentally discovered the Christmas marathon in Los Angeles. Of course, we noticed a great increase in the number of people going into the stores, and the stores were staying open sometimes until midnight. I was standing in front of a Burbank Zodi's. We were having an intense competition with prizes in Los Angeles, and it was building up to a feverish pitch. So after distributing madly all day long, I had collected about $350 and had distributed 650 magazines. It was about 10 o'clock at night. I was convinced this was the new world's record in ISKCON and that nobody was possibly going to beat me this day. Even though the store was open until 12, business had started slowing off, and I was thinking maybe I should go back. Undoubtedly, everyone is back already. No one has ever stayed out past 8 o'clock. They all be waiting up for me. I shouldn't keep them waiting up. So in this way, my mind was convincing me to go back. By 11 o'clock, the store was completely dead. I got in the car and started driving back. On the way back, I passed another Zodi's called Hollywood Zodi's. On Sunset and Western, I was torn whether to stop or not because that store was crowded and was going to be open until midnight. But I decided, no, I will go back because the other devotees will be waiting up to see how many books I distributed. So I just kept driving. I finally arrived at the temple at about 10 minutes to 12, and I burst into the Sankirtan room, but the only person there was the secretary, Madhukanta. I said, "Oh no, everyone went to bed?" He said, "No, nobody is back yet." I was the first one back. That was the discovery of the first Christmas marathon. It was completely unplanned. No one had ever instructed anyone to stay out that late. We just did it spontaneously. Finally, at about 1:30 in the morning, all the devotees had returned, and we were all sitting around looking at the Sankirtan map. We couldn't sleep. We were so excited to go out. We were thinking, where can we find plenty of conditioned souls to distribute books too. Our noise and raucous laughter was like a drunken party, and it woke up Kalandar, who was sleeping in his office in the next room. He came stumbling in, weeping, wiping the sleep from his eyes. But when he saw us and saw what was going on, he burst out laughing and sent us all to bed, saying, "Get ready for tomorrow." So, in this way, we performed the 3 day marathon, December 22nd, 23rd, and 24th. No one had ever distributed as many books before in the history of our movement. A big day had been considered to be somewhere between 25 and 40 books, 25 and 40 books. But we were distributing between 5,000 and 6,000 pieces of literature a day for a 3 day period. One temple had distributed almost 18,000 pieces of literature in just 3 days. At this time, Srila Prabhupada was in Bombay, where his attempt to secure the land in Juhu had become entangling. The landlord was now refusing to sell the property and was trying to evict the devotees. Even though Srila Prabhupada had already installed Radha Krishna deities on the land, although these matters were causing Srila Prabhupada anxiety, he continued this usual daily duties, taking his morning walk, lecturing in the evening from the nectar of devotion, corresponding with and receiving news from his centers around the world, even organizing a Bombay Pandal festival for January. When Prabhupada received news of the book distribution in Los Angeles and elsewhere in the United States, he was very pleased and amazed. Although involved with many affairs from throughout the world, he put them aside and relished the overwhelming victory of book distribution in America. Immediately he called his personal secretary and dictated letters. My dear Rameshwar, I beg to acknowledge receipt of your letter dated December 27, 1972, and with great happiness I have read your figures of amount of books sold during 3 day period, December 22nd to 24th, 1972. It is a scarcely believable that more than 17,000 books would have been sold by one temple in 3 days. That indicates to me that people are at last becoming little serious about this Krishna consciousness movement in your country. Otherwise, why they should buy our books? But they can see that our boys and girls devotees are so much sincere and serious to distribute the message of Krishna consciousness. They are at once struck by selling them, and therefore they appreciate and purchase. This is unique in the world. So I am so much pleased upon all of the boys and girls in Los Angeles and all over the world who are understanding and appreciating this unique quality of our transcendental literature, and voluntarily they are going out to distribute despite all circumstances of difficulty. By this effort alone, they are assured to go back to home, back to Godhead. The same day, Prabhupada dictated a letter to Karandar. I could never have thought it was possible to distribute so many of our literatures. Therefore, I can understand it is simply Krishna's blessing us for your sincerely working on his behalf. Actually, that is the secret of my success. Not that personally I have done anything wonderful, but that because those who are helping me are sincere. They have done the work. That is the reason for our success all over the world where others have failed. A little sincerity is very difficult thing in this age of hypocrisy and bluff. But I am so fortunate that Krishna has sent me all of you nice boys and girls who are sincerely working. Please convey to all of them my deepest appreciation. Srila Prabhupada's letters acknowledging the Christmas marathon and assuring the devotees that they would go back to Godhead sent the book distribution movement flying into the new year with great momentum. Devotees continue to find new ways and places to distribute books. New records were constantly topping the old, and the devotees were making still higher projections for the future. Rameshwar published in the February 1973 newsletter a letter from a college student who had read one of Srila Prabhupada's books. ISKCON's mail order office was receiving hundreds of letters a month. Sir, a couple of weeks ago, devotees of Krishna from Denver, I understand, were here at the University of Arkansas distributing literature. One young man approached me with a hard pitch for my purchasing a copy of the Prabhupada translation of the Bhagavad Gita. I was initially quite skeptical. So many people are getting rich from selling their versions of the answer, and told him to not bother me. He insisted though, and I finally gave in. I have been reading the Gita, having not having not finished it yet, and have found it quite rewarding. My mind, shaped in logic and empiricism, seems to be find itself barely trusting the transcendental material in the book. I discuss it with others. I find myself remembering certain passages. It has genuinely stimulated my interest, to say the least, in a way that my quite extensive readings in Christianity, Zen Buddhism, the lower forms of yoga, etc., have never succeeded in doing. In short, I think I have finally found the beginning. Rameshwar went on to beat the drum of Sankirtan. Actually, no one can properly measure the effect of our book distribution. If it was known how many books were distributed each month, we would be listed on every bestseller list in the country. For example, as many of you know, already the new Gita has outsold any other edition of the Gita ever printed. The Macmillan Company has already sold tens of thousands of copies, while we have sold over 20,000 copies ourselves since they first appeared last August.
The rest करो.
Okay.
This
मैं वो बिल्कुल ज़्यादा एक दिन जैसे कुछ चले जाऊँगा और Hey, Mama, man, you speak to Papa Jora?
Yes, it's up to him now. I told him that you will speak to him tomorrow and work something out.
But you did tell him that I sent you to him?
Yes, I told him that Maharaj sent me here and asking you to please come for the program for Srila Prabhupada's pleasure. I added that.
What did he say?
Huh?
What did he say that? You're happy?
Sriram Pandit is there and also Tresta is there.
think the whole, particular.
For US, yes, for US. I don't know if it's true or not, but they he just told it. But anyway, he is from more likely to come. Main thing is he was heard, especially in that resolution, saying that Sankadari people, whatever Sankadari started, it will remain as it is. And what is the use of him being the president, really? He doesn't have a say. That's the main thing. That hurts him the most. You give him title of president, but he doesn't have a say. Right
Right.
from the very beginning. And they ignore. I mean, he would say something to Sankadari to put the president. Sankadari was ignoring it. It's not, like that is the main thing.
You mean,
Hopefully he'll come. Hopefully he'll come.
what is your criticism? Should the criticism?
I don't know. I just think he wanted him to remain, stay.
What is his phone number?
For his phone number, I will send it. I have it.
Thank you. Oh.
Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.
What question will I throw? I'm just calling to request you, please come for the celebration today.